a shattered mirror, a cryptic message scrawled in blood, and a chilling silence that lingered long after the crime. For years, these were the haunting trademarks of a killer who seemed to step out of a nightmare. She called herself the Guardian of Reflections, but the world knows her as Maria Stanton, the Mirror Killer. Her victims weren't chosen by chance. Each was a distorted reflection of the fears she couldn't escape, shattered into fragments that only she understood. Her crimes left detectives baffled, the public terrified, and forensic experts working against time to piece together the shards of her madness. For every victim, a mirror was broken, its glass bearing a message in their own blood. The meaning, as twisted and fragmented as Maria herself. Who was Maria Stanton? What drove her obsession with mirrors and her need to kill? And how did the cryptic messages she left behind unlock the secrets of her mind? This is the story of a killer who turned her darkest fears into a blood-soaked legacy, and the investigators who finally cracked her reflection. Maria Stanton was born into a life that seemed ordinary on the surface, but underneath lay cracks that would eventually shatter her reality. Raised in a small town in Indiana, Maria was an only child to parents who were loving yet deeply flawed. Her father, an antique dealer, brought mirrors into their home by the dozens, and as a child, Maria became fascinated, some would say obsessed, with her own reflection. But this obsession took a darker turn. Neighbors recalled a young Maria spending hours staring at her reflection, whispering to it as though it could talk back. Psychologists would later speculate that these early behaviors were signs of a developing psychosis, but at the time, no one thought much of it. By her teenage years, Maria's life began to spiral. Her mother passed away suddenly in a car accident, and her father fell into alcoholism. Maria's obsession with mirrors deepened, and she started to believe they held secrets, answers to questions only she could ask. She often told classmates that mirrors didn't reflect reality but distorted it, hiding the truth beneath the surface. She became increasingly withdrawn, isolated, and paranoid. At the age of 23, Maria moved to the city, taking on jobs as a housekeeper and antique restorer. It was there that her obsession evolved into something far more sinister. Her first known victim was a man named Thomas Grayson, a landlord in his 40s who had been pressuring Maria about unpaid rent. Over the next 2 years, a pattern emerged. Victims with no clear connection to each other were found in eerily similar circumstances. Broken mirrors at every scene, messages written in blood. Each message was unique but shared a common theme: reality, distortion, and fear. The media dubbed her the Mirror Killer, a name that only fueled Maria's delusions. Detectives began piecing together a psychological profile of the killer. Experts suggested she was likely someone with a deep distrust of people, someone who saw others as threats or distortions of her own fears. Yet, Maria was careful, methodical. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. One particularly haunting case was that of Julia Parks, a schoolteacher who lived alone. Julia was found in her bedroom, her face turned toward a shattered mirror. The message read, "Truth hides in the shards." Investigators noted that Julia had recently been vocal about concerns over a stalker, but no one had taken her claims seriously. As the body count rose, the messages grew more cryptic, more personal. Forensic psychologists believed Maria saw her victims as manifestations of her own inner demons. Each killing was a way to purge her fears, but the act only deepened her spiral into madness. Maria's next victim, however, would become her undoing. It was in the case of Michael Duvall, a private investigator who had unknowingly crossed paths with Maria while working on a missing person case. Duvall's body was found in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by mirrors Maria had carefully arranged. The message this time was chillingly direct. The reflection watches, but this time Maria made a mistake. Investigators found partial footprints in the blood, a rare, distinctive boot sole that was later traced to a limited edition line sold in one store. Surveillance footage from that store placed Maria Stanton at the scene just weeks before. The hunt for the mirror killer was now personal for law enforcement. They were closing in, but Maria wasn't done yet. Each murder became more elaborate, as though she knew her time was running out. For Maria Stanton, the line between her victims and her own reflection was disappearing. Each shattered mirror was a glimpse into her fractured mind, a warning of the storm that was about to break. By the time Maria Stanton claimed her fifth victim, investigators were caught in a web of shattered glass and cryptic messages, with no clear path to untangle her twisted motives. The media frenzy surrounding the mirror killer had escalated, and public pressure on law enforcement to catch her was mounting. But what investigators lacked in immediate answers, they made up for with relentless determination. At the heart of the investigation was Detective Claire Foster, a veteran in homicide who had seen her share of brutal crimes. But nothing like this. For Claire, the shattered mirrors and cryptic messages weren't just the calling card of a killer. They were a puzzle begging to be solved. The first major breakthrough came with the help of forensic linguistics. Analysts studied the wording of the messages left behind, looking for patterns. They found that the phrases Maria wrote often contained references to distortion and fear, concepts common in delusional thought patterns. Experts began crafting a psychological profile of a killer who might be projecting her inner turmoil onto her victims. Maria's sixth victim, however, provided something new: physical evidence. A small shard of glass with a partial fingerprint was found wedged under the body of the victim, a street artist named Leo Hayes. While it wasn't enough to identify the killer outright, it narrowed the field. The fingerprint was a partial match to someone who had once been arrested for trespassing, but the identity was sealed in juvenile records. Investigators suspected they were closing in on a woman with a troubled past. Detective Foster began piecing together a timeline. By cross-referencing the locations of the crimes with records of individuals who had been in those areas, she identified a single name that appeared at least 3 times in proximity to the murders: Maria Stanton. Maria's name initially seemed innocuous, a housekeeper with no criminal history. But further digging revealed her troubled childhood and a peculiar detail: her father's antique business, which specialized in restoring old mirrors. Investigators now had a potential connection between Maria's past and her crimes. The pieces began to fall into place with the 7th murder. This time, Maria left behind something even more telling. Beneath the shattered mirror, investigators found a journal page, written in what they believed was Maria's handwriting. The scrawled notes were incoherent at first glance, but included references to reflections and shards of truth. Handwriting experts compared the journal page to employment records Maria had signed years earlier, and the match was undeniable. Still, Maria remained elusive. Surveillance footage placed her near several of the crime scenes, but she was careful, always avoiding cameras at key moments. Her ability to evade capture suggested not only intelligence, but a meticulous nature. The investigation took a dramatic turn when detectives identified the source of the distinctive boots found at Michael Duvall's crime scene. A boutique store owner recalled selling the boots to a woman matching Maria's description. Maria had paid in cash, leaving no paper trail, but the store's security footage finally provided a clear image of her face. With this, law enforcement issued a statewide alert. As the search for Maria intensified, so did her crimes. Her 8th victim, an accountant named Brenda Lee, was found with a chilling message. The reflection breaks, but the truth remains. By now, Maria was becoming bolder, leaving behind more elaborate clues. Investigators believed she wanted to be caught, but on her terms. It wasn't until Maria's ninth and final attempt that everything unraveled. Her intended victim, a young journalist named Evan Carter, had been investigating the mirror killer case for an exposé. Maria had been following Evan for weeks, believing he had discovered her secrets. But Evan fought back when Maria attacked him in his apartment. In the struggle, Maria left behind a crucial piece of evidence: a strand of her hair, tangled in Evan's shirt. DNA analysis confirmed the hair belonged to Maria Stanton. Armed with this evidence, law enforcement tracked her to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. When officers arrived, they found Maria surrounded by shattered mirrors, each etched with cryptic messages she'd scrawled in lipstick. Maria surrendered without resistance. In her confession, she spoke in riddles, describing her victims as broken reflections and claiming she wasn't killing people, but their distorted images. Her delusions painted a picture of a deeply fractured mind, one that couldn't separate reality from the reflections she believed held the truth. Forensic psychologists later diagnosed Maria with a severe form of schizophrenia, compounded by years of untreated trauma. Her obsession with mirrors stemmed from her belief that they revealed hidden truths about the people she saw in them. Each murder, in her mind, was an act of liberation, shattering the lies she believed the reflections told. But it was the meticulous work of investigators that brought Maria to justice. From the linguists who unraveled her messages to the forensic analysts who matched her fingerprint and DNA, the case was a testament to the power of determination and collaboration. Maria Stanton's trial became a national spectacle. The courtroom was filled with mirrors covered in black cloth, an eerie request by her defense team, who claimed the reflections would trigger her delusions. The jury took only 3 hours to convict her of 9 counts of first-degree murder. In the end, it wasn't just justice for the victims, but a chilling reminder of the fragile line between reality and madness. Maria Stanton had lived her life trapped in a world of broken reflections, and it was only through the dedication of law enforcement that her reign of terror came to an end. Maria Stanton's conviction brought an end to a series of brutal murders that had left a community shattered, much like the mirrors she obsessively destroyed. Her sentencing to life without parole was a relief for the families of her victims, but it also left lingering questions about the fragility of the human mind and the warning signs that were overlooked. In the courtroom, Maria showed little emotion as the verdict was read. Psychologists later described her as detached, living in a world where her delusions were more real to her than the lives she had taken. When asked if she regretted her actions, Maria reportedly replied, "I only regret the mirrors couldn't show the truth." Her words sent chills through those in attendance, a final reminder of the darkness that consumed her. For investigators, the case was as much a triumph as it was a sobering lesson. Detective Claire Foster later reflected on the painstaking process of uncovering the truth, describing it as piecing together shards of glass without knowing what the full picture would reveal. The investigation required not only forensic skill, but an understanding of the complex and deeply fractured mind they were pursuing. Maria's obsession with mirrors, psychologists explained, stemmed from years of untreated mental illness. The reflections she saw weren't merely images. They were distortions of her fears, insecurities, and traumas. To her, breaking the mirror wasn't an act of violence, but of liberation, a way to shatter the lies she believed they told. The legacy of Maria's crimes lives on, not just in the pain of the family she left behind, but in the lessons learned by law enforcement. Advances in forensic psychology and profiling, spurred by cases like hers, continue to help investigators understand the minds of killers. But Maria's case also serves as a stark warning. Sometimes, the most dangerous reflections are the ones we fail to confront within ourselves. As the final chapter of Maria Stanton's story closes, one thing remains clear. The truth she sought was buried not in shattered glass, but in the fractured pieces of her own mind. The mirror killer will be remembered not only for the horror she inflicted, but for the questions she left unanswered. Questions about fear, identity, and the fine line between reality and madness.